Hi. All right. Well, I'm going to read you some more today, this morning, this afternoon. All right. So what I'm going to read to you today is from this chapbook, this scene that's titled "The Memory of Souls." Might be hard to see the title, but it's "The Memory of Souls" by Cliff Taylor, who is an author. You will also find in the zine I talked about last time, which is Bolbuncha is Still a Place. You'll find one of his pieces in there, and maybe in the future also in that series. So this though is just his work, and his writing is really excellent. I really enjoy reading this. It's very conversational and intimate, and you just really feel like you're having a conversation with Cliff, which is really cool. So I'm going to read you a few things out of here today, and I'll be talking. I'm going to do a second part at least on this because there's quite a bit probably to say just on the topic of what comes up in this chapbook, which is that for Indigenous people of the United States, which originally was known as Turtle Island, so for the Indigenous of Turtle Island, the concept of the little people or aliens, something like that, history in their folklore and in the spiritual understanding of themselves and their ancestors. And so they have had a long tradition of a belief system and also an experience system that I think is really important. And it involves dreams, and it involves ancestral communication. It involves a great number of things that I don't pretend to understand myself. And so as I educate myself more on this topic, I'm going to share that with you also. So, but there's a long history of, I know a friend of mine who had gone to Standing Rock a couple years ago was saying that, the indigenous up there were saying, oh, I wouldn't go out there, you don't want to go out there, that's where the aliens live. And I know that there's a history of storytelling about aliens in living in the Badlands, and you didn't want to live out in the Badlands because that's where the aliens lived. I know that there's a show going on right now, a reality show, um, about something called Skinwalker Ranch, which is out in Montana. And they are going to bring in a Navajo elder, I believe, to talk to them on the show. I don't know. I'm not real hopeful about any of that because I think the show's pretty racist. And I don't think bringing in a Navajo elder is going to make it less racist. I mean, it's a nice touch. We'll see. Maybe I should reserve judgment, but I've seen enough by now. So I'm not fond of the show, and I'm not fond of how they're going about what they're trying to find out there, and I'm not fond of their attitude, and I'm just not really fond of kind of the whole. I don't know, white people lore around Skinwalker Ranch at this point in time. So I don't know, but one of the things that you can see photos of, that you can see pictures of on the show, is where there's these reflective like starlights, like out in the hills, I guess you might say, and there's these reflective starlights. Which is an ancient, that's always been there. So I think they're, for the purpose of their show, or they're trying to kind of turn that into something else. But it's something that indigenous people, the indigenous of Turtle Island, have actually talked about for a long time. And you'll find lights like that in New Mexico and other places. So while the indigenous of Turtle Island have a long tradition in folklore and storytelling of their own about little people and aliens, it kind of turned into this thing that as the indigenous were pushed out of their settlements and their lands and their trade routes, and pushed farther out into desert and rougher terrain to live, that white people started to call them aliens. And so this book doesn't really get into that, not yet, at least anyway. But I want to put that out there, that this winds up being something that sometimes when we talk about aliens, which is a topic I enjoy. It's a hobby, that I like listening to a little bit. I don't have any theories on it, though, frankly, but it's something that I enjoy. That sometimes probably what we're hearing and seeing and thinking is actually really, really racist. So anyway, let me read some really beautiful work to you today from The Memory of Souls by Cliff Taylor. So I'm not going to fill you in on what the little bits necessarily are. Maybe I will a little bit, but if you're interested, I'm sure that we can get you, or maybe not. You might not be able to get this. You might just have to take it from me. We'll see what happens with that. All right. So I'll fill you in a little bit on a few things. All right, everybody, thanks for bearing with me when I do these videos. Okay, so this is Cliff Taylor. I dreamed of a little old man, maybe 2 to 2.5 feet tall. The dream is too special for me to share here, but I will say that he gave me some things, shared with me his name, and told me, call me and I will come to help you. He also talked to me some about a kind of assignment we work on here. We were to work on. We need to fix the memory of souls, he said. I repeated this back to him. We need to fix the memory of souls to heal the people? Yes, he said, to heal the people. When I woke up from this dream, it was like a strange sacred music box had been clicked open deep inside me. Long time. And maybe it is sort of still playing right now, even. The dream had a strong, intimate afterglow. I prayed and received an immediate answer. The things shown to me in the dream were sacred, mysterious, wet with blessings in a way that would never change, permanently so. I sat in my bed and hummed with a nighttime kind of awe, cut and quiet. The dream crackled inside me like a small fire. So that's just 2 paragraphs out of what is a longer story, but I think it's really beautiful, and I think it starts to get to the idea of how some of this works, at least for Cliff. Okay, here's something that I want to, because there's a lot of spiritual work is done in dreams, and a lot of ancestor work is done in dreams, or can be. And there's a history of this. There's a history of dream work, and there's a history of ancestor work that comes with this. So I want to, this is another little bit that's about storytelling and the indigenous of Turtle Island. I think something that's interesting, that if you don't know this, when the settlers, the colonizers on Turtle Island would speak of the dumb Indian, they meant dumb like the Indian wasn't speaking. Or you can even still, here in this country, you can find wooden Indians outside of cigar shops and things like that. Still, I think there's one here. I'm in St. Louis right now, and I think there's one still here. But the idea of the dumb Indian or the wooden Indian had to do with when you... when indigenous people spoke, or maybe still this is still true in the culture, speak or ask you a question. If you're asked a question, the appropriate thing to do is to think about what you've been asked and to answer the or to also, and think about what's been said to you, to respectfully listen. And so when European settlers came, and the indigenous people didn't respond immediately. They were silent, and they were taking in a question, or taking in an answer, or taking in something that someone had said. When they were being in consideration, the Europeans made them very angry, and they demanded, you need to answer me, and you need to speak. And so they called that being a dumb Indian. Look, they're so dumb. You ask them a question and they don't respond, or you communicate with them and they don't respond. So that's where that comes from. That idea comes from. So, all right. Anyway, I want to talk about, this is a little bit here from Cliff Taylor about storytelling. And this is a paragraph about storytelling. The two Indian women answered almost every question they were asked with a story. To answer, they told a story. I wondered if anyone else noticed this. The telling of a story includes almost everything that makes us Indian people who we are. All the dimensions of a human being are stimulated and pulled into the act and process when a person is telling a story that really means something to them, that is about things that matter. The same is potentially touch in the listener or listeners, all those dimensions that make us up, that make us who we are. To tell a story is to be true to the whole of life. Our particular conceptualizations about the nature of that whole secondary and unable to substantially interfere with what is actually happening. A person is speaking. The whole mystery of their life and person, of their soul, is speaking, communicating, sharing. What we talk about lives. As long as we tell our stories, we are alive. I love that. Thank you, Cliff Taylor. That's the whole thing. When someone answers your question, when someone tells you a story, when someone speaks to you, all of them is present in that. They're entirely present in that. And I think that's really beautiful. And to take consideration of that, to take consideration of the entirety of a person when they're speaking, when you're communicating with them. If you're only interested in your own thoughts, you don't need the rest of us. If you don't care about our stories and you don't care about our thoughts and you don't care about our answers, you don't need us. If all you need is yourself, congratulations. But the rest of us are going to continue to be here. Okay. All right. I'm going to talk a little bit. Here's another thing that's also from part of the spirituality of the ancestors, the little people, just the spiritual communication that indigenous of Turtle Island engage in is the sweat lodge, which has an entire ceremony around it. It's an entire, not just a ceremony, but there's an entire culture of how the lodges are built, who and when goes in them, and who runs them, who speaks, who doesn't speak, all of these things. I don't really know these traditions, but I know that it isn't just going to sit around some rocks, hot rocks. Okay, there's a lot more that goes into it, and it can be dangerous. So also, if people are offering you these, I think there's been some terrible stories of what can happen if you're not having this experience with someone with people who know how to do it, and also people who will listen to you. Okay, if you're like hot and you're dehydrating, you can't have someone saying like, get back in there and go have like a spirit quest or whatever. You need people to listen. This goes back to what I just said a moment ago. Like, what you have to say matters, and your stories matter, and your time matters, and your effort matters. And when you say, I'm too hot in the sweat lodge, and then somebody tells you you're not spiritual enough, I think you need to be really cautious about that. But at any rate, it is a tradition that should be taken very seriously, that continues to this day, with tribes that are continuing onward. The indigenous of Turtle Island were not destroyed, and they continue to engage their cultures and continue these traditions into today. So, but this is about sweating. Okay. After I had the dream, I began to call this little old man and his other relatives in sweat regularly. It was hard. I'd call them, and then I'd feel this energy, a lot of times, but not every time, fill my body. It was so overwhelming, so sacred, so holy, so emotional, so powerful. It was like deep inside the human heart, there was this spot where all the different kinds of tears a person can cry met and shared a single, common, grief-filled nature. And their coming into the lodge would touch that spot, and I'd start crying loudly and almost uncontrollably. I felt the bottomless suffering of the world, the ineffable beauty of life, the immeasurable, infinite power of the other world. I was taken into the intricacies of so many souls that were struggling to make their way in this world. I was a glass overflowing with the water of the spirits, a glass packed full of the sand of higher materials. My capacity for feeling was tore open, and afterwards, when I was left to heal up, that capacity would knit itself back together as bigger, able to contain more, able to handle and withstand more. Among all these tough relatives of mine, scarred up, having seen a lot of the dark side of life, I would cry out embarrassingly like a young wounded animal. Those little people would come, and their energy was so holy and intense that it just made me cry for all the things I saw and felt in that expanded state. It was good, like a bloodletting, giving me my soul and its abilities back. But it was hard, honest, like a prehistoric thunderstorm, real, like the worst kinds of pain, holy, like love. Oh, thank you, Cliff. Oh, man. That's some beautiful, beautiful writing. What a beautiful experience to share with us. And that's what I've heard about sweat lodges. You wouldn't find me in a sweat lodge really doing until I have like this kind of experience. But for people who do it, it's thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing anything that happens to you in a deep sweat like that. Thank you so much. And again, don't take it lightly. Don't just go out and get somebody to try to sweat you. Okay, I'm just going to read you a couple more things today. I hope you're enjoying this. And I'm going to bring you some more from this and also a little bit more of my understandings about indigenous people of Turtle Island and the little people. Because what I'm getting from it too is it's like the little people are they're us, they're our ancestors, and we are they, and they are we, and so on and so forth. All right. All right. So this one, okay. This is several paragraphs long. All right. So this is about his helper person. So this is really the old man, I think. And this is more about dreams and dreaming. And I think Cliff does a really great job of writing about dreaming, which I think is hard to do. I think it's hard to tell interesting stories about dreaming. And I think it's hard to write interesting stories about dreaming. And I think that he does a really great job. I think because in some ways, this is another world. Like this isn't just fragments of his psychology so much as it is like he's really traveling in his dreams. And I think that's part of what makes the writing about it so good. Okay. In this one, I was in a house encountering this frightening, monstrously large version of my father. It seemed like more than some normal psychological dream to me. It was scarier. For whatever reason, I began to call that little old man my spirit helper and his relatives, the other little people. I prayed and called them in the dream, and then in a blink, I was in a different dream. Now I was small and looking up, like a baby looking up out of a crib, and surrounding me in a loving half circle were about 5 of these little people, but slightly different looking. They were also just a couple of feet tall, but instead of miniature looking humans, they were almost like angelic gremlins. They were naked, luminously green skinned, pointy eared, and completely smooth and without genitals in their crotch areas. This beyond human, utterly trust inspiring, warming love sweetness radiated out of them. Like this sweetness was their true nature, and it cut me right to the core. I breathed this love of theirs in with all of my pores. I looked at them closely to take in their features and appearance. Then, telepathically, I asked them, which one of you is. I scanned them, and then this one at the end, almost shyly, looked down and to the ground. It was him. He was my helper, the little old man in another of his forms. I kind of met him in kind and looked over these little beings, studying them in the lucidity of the dream, all the while really checking out my friend out of the corner of my eye, indirectly, gently. I looked them over, felt their special love and sweetness, and then woke up. This dream, my second of the little people in a week, was more in what became a long, slow process of them introducing themselves to me, of us building up our relations, of me gathering an understanding of them. This dream is significant because I've always felt like that indescribable love sweetness of theirs I experienced is like their signature, the essential feeling print, like an identifying fingerprint or footprint of their kind spirit. In this dream, I was given a taste of their true essence, almost like so I could find them and know them and remember them properly. Also, maybe so my growing knowledge of them could begin on the right sort of solid, basic foundation. The word is sweetness, like the no strings attached kind of affection given to you by someone who truly loves you. But I have had a hard time finding the perfect same sweetness generating analog. It was a sweetness like the smell of night on the wind during a perfect hour in the wilderness. It was sweetness like the kind that just makes you want to close your eyes and smile softly. It was sweetness like many different kinds of love, all wrapped up into one. That is such a beautiful section. That is such a meaningful section of writing. And I really relate to what's being said here, though perhaps with different experiences of my own, not so much the little people. But thank you so much for that. I really understand beings that have a signature of sweetness, and they do take different forms, most certainly. Maybe I'll talk about some of my own experiences a little bit more at some point. Um, yeah, let me read you this also. And again, I'm not going to give you the build up for this. I'm just going to read this beautiful writing, okay? And that wasn't the only night they came to O'Rourke's over the years. There were other nights like that too. I remember a series of them where about 2 beers in, they'd come and talk with me while I smoked by myself out in the smoker's garden. I'd smoke and look out into the cold downtown scene and listen to them talk to me about spiritual things. I felt so Indian, drinking and alone in a culture where my people were little more than an unremembered footnote to most. Listening to the spirits, these true caretakers of the land and life of America, talk to me about the deeper reality, learning from them like my ancestors did, but as real and regular and half lost as the other guy drinking by himself and staring off into space at the table a few feet away from me. These little people would fill me with strings of understandings as I smoked, and then they'd take off and let me drink the rest of my night away. To me, this was real spirituality. It came to you even at the bar. I found you when you needed it most. I made you feel complex, real, contradictory, soulful, and extra alive. One time while smoking outside the gas station where I work, they came and, among other things, said, "We are not just your relatives, but you are our relative. We are not just your family, but you are our family. Do you understand?" I talked back to them in my mind. Yes, I did. So nice. All right, I'm going to read you one more section today, and then we'll do a part 2, and I'll talk a little bit more about this topic to you and about Cliff's work. If I can, I will put the information I have about this. This is very limited edition, actually. So I'm not sure. This is 175 out of 220. So, but I'll put the any information I have in the link below. But this will be, let me read this one more section for you today. That little person was giving that Omaha boy an experience he would never forget, so that as he got older, no matter where in his life it took him, he would know in a deep way that the things of his people were real, that they were not just a bunch of junk or superstition or folk tales, but they were reality, a truer reality than most had any idea about. That little person spoke of stoking the fire of the boy's interest in the Sundance, because that interest in an Indian child and even an adult is like the branch tip of the tree of their spirit's nature, poking out into their conscious awareness. Break it off or let it die, and it might take a while to grow back. As conditions for its doing so are pretty poor in this day and age, or it might get lost for good, depriving them of this area of basic intuitive guidance. The boy's interest was a cord he could use to follow his way back to the Sundance and the culture, both of which would be waiting for him with the endless things they had to give him. It is a special blessing to know the things of the spirit and the spirit world are real and exist. This special blessing can and often does make all the difference in a person's life journey. The little people cared about this young boy. In his spirit, they saw the story of our Indian people today, and they wanted him to be able to find his way back someday. If he ever got lost, if he ever needed to, they gave him a breadcrumb. In a way, they gave a lot of us a breadcrumb. Follow the trail of breadcrumbs, and you'll be able to find your way back. Beautiful. All right. Thanks for listening today. I think what I'll do, honestly, if you're interested in trying to get a copy of this, get a hold of me. All right. And maybe there's something we can do for you. I don't want to put Cliff's info on YouTube without his permission. So get in touch with me if this is something you're interested in. This is beautiful. Join me next time, and we're going to talk more about The Memory of Souls by Cliff Taylor. All right. And thank you, Cliff.